أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Welcome everyone to another installment of Research Forum, introduced to you by brought to you by Maqasid Institute, having these monthly research forums for more than a year now. And alhamdulillah, we've hosted a number of scholars from around the world, and we're continuing. And so today we have our dear brother and colleague and friend, Dr. Baptiste Brodard, and he will be talking about Islam, welfare, social services, and human dignity. Without further ado, let me introduce the speaker. Dr. Baptiste Brodard. He's a scholar specializing in Islamic studies and mostly focusing on Islamic social work, contemporary Islamic movements, and faith-based social activism. He has a PhD in religious studies from the University of Freiburg in Switzerland, where he completed a thesis, if I'm not mistaken. It was on Islamic social work in Switzerland. So he studies at the intersection of sociology, religious studies, and theology. And his background includes a bachelor degree in, I think, in political science, and then a master's degree also from Freiburg University in Switzerland. And his experience spans various fields, including development, education, counseling, and social work, and also significant involvement in social work within prisons and humanitarian aid. And he's an avid traveler, and if you visit his sometimes if you visit his Facebook page, you can see his extensive travels, mashallah. And he visited over 50 countries and engaged with diverse Muslim communities. And this way he studies the contemporary Islamic movements. And so his current research interests are centered on social problems, grassroots humanitarian aid, and the role of Islamic movements in non-Muslim countries, particularly in Europe and in Latin America. So he is one of our senior fellow researchers at Maqasid Institute, and he was also an assistant professor at the sociology at International Islamic University, and before that he was also with International Peace College of South Africa. So of course he brings a lot of a wealth of cultural and background and religious background and scholarly background to the discussion today. Islam, Islamic social work, and humanitarian and human dignity. So without further ado, Dr. Brodard, please, the floor is yours, the microphone is yours. Please go ahead. Thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thanks a lot, Dr. Ildos. Jazakallah khair. Thanks for the presentation, the introduction of my profile, and I thanks Dr. Zaid as well and Dr. Sheikh Jasser for giving us the inspiration of following this Maqasid methodology. Today, I would like to speak about my paper that was published in the Maqasid Institute paper journal a few weeks ago. I think a few months ago. I'm not sure about the dates, but the idea is to come back to this paper to explain different ideas that I try to develop in a bit more informal way, because then afterwards you can go back to the paper to get more details. But I think it's important to launch the discussion, especially with the Q&A session at the end. So thanks to all the Maqasid Institute staff to let me the opportunity to be here today. I'm very happy every time to take part to this kind of communication. I'm going to share my screen for a few slides on a PowerPoint. I hope you can all see it. So the idea today is to explore different aspects that I tried to develop in my paper. Of course, these aspects are related, but they explore different ideas. And like all the time, or most of the time, what we do, trying to do in this kind of intellectual endeavor with the Maqasid Institute is to stay connected, to promote a holistic approach, and the holistic one, meaning that every aspect has something to say and something to communicate with the other aspects. It's very important. That's why even the outline it works a bit like a circle, because we start with an introduction, we finish with the conclusion, obviously, but we keep in mind that every idea has something to do with the previous and the next ideas that we'd like to develop. This brief outline for these 45, 50 minutes, I'll try to respect the time. I'm coming back to my paper, but before starting, I would like to give a few speech about Islamic studies, especially in the West, to see how it concerns us as scholars, as Muslim scholars trying to develop talk on Islam. We'll see that in a few minutes, inshallah. But for the introduction, before talking about my paper, I would like to say that first, I'm sorry for the sound. I think that's when you participants are coming to join. I mean, what I tried to do these last years in the university was to develop some expertise on Muslim communities and concrete issues that Muslims face. But also, I explored some themes such as Islamic charities, Islamic social work, or Muslim faith-based organizations promoting da'wah or doing different kind of activities from humanitarian aid to spreading Islam. So my approach was based on the field. It was very sociological in the way that I just tried to understand what happened in the field. Not what should be done, but what was doing concretely, what happened in society, whether we liked it or not. And it's very important for us here, because that's something that we need to think carefully to distinguish between the normative tone and the descriptive and analytical one. So the first part of my expertise was based on the analysis of society. Then at the second stage, and thanks to the Maqasid Institute, I could start trying to draft reflection on Maqasid, on Islam in a more normative tone, meaning to understand how Islam teaches us to behave. And at the end, I could compare between reality and between what Islam teaches us to do. So that's a very important introduction for my approach, because we'll see how both connect each other. It's obviously it makes sense when we are Muslim scholars on where we work with the Maqasid Institute. It's the core of our work. But if you work in the Western academia, sometimes it's not something that is accepted or understood, just because of the methodology issues, the epistemological issues as well, and because of the fact that scholars are officially not supposed to give talk about normative Islam. But I'll come back to this aspect a bit later. I think it's quite central and important here. First, for my theme, for my subject, it stems from observation of a context. Over the last years, in Muslim or non-Muslim societies, we witness a rise of so-called Islamic NGOs or Muslim charities that promote da'wah on the one hand, and they promote also diverse missions such as humanitarian aid or social welfare services on the other hand. And for instance, these NGOs or these FBOs, faith-based organizations, provide Muslims but also non-Muslims with clothes, with food, but also free tuition, counseling, financial support, mediation, and diverse kind of service. That's something that we observe on the field, whether it's in the US or in the UK or in Germany or in South Africa. We observe the same patterns more or less in these organizations. At the same time, some of them do also what they call da'wah, Islamic preaching, and that's my starting point. In my PhD thesis and in my postdoctoral research about Islam in Latin America, I try to understand how these organizations concretely work, what they do and why and how. That's a very sociological approach of the phenomenon, trying to describe realities, trying to analyze their features. But now, at the same time, I went a bit further, asking a question. My question is that these organizations are supposed to be Muslim, they are supposed to comply with Islamic teachings because they claim to provide Islamic based services. Most of them. For instance, they said, we are a Muslim NGO, so we do what we do, fi sabilillah, and we help people because we are Muslims. But my question, my basic and fundamental question behind that is to measure the compliance of these Islamic projects and genuine Islamic principles. I don't know if you get the idea, but on the one hand, you have this aspect of identity. You take a Muslim NGO, you take a Muslim association, they provide concrete work in society, and they claim to do that because they are Muslim and because of Islam. But the other hand, it's legitimate for us to ask, what's Islamic in these so-called Islamic projects? You know, we have the same reflection on the Islamic universities and so-called Islamic whatever. It's maybe it can appear like a label. Maybe it's a genuine Islamic to the extent that it's related to Islamic methodology and fundamentals and epistemology. That's the big issue and the big question to be answered. And it's not that easy. That's why I will speak a bit later about the methodology, the Maqasid methodology. But before doing this, I would like to come back to our legitimacy as a scholar, as scholars, talking about Islam. Because today it becomes very tricky, and a lot of people still don't realize these tricks and these traps in which we can fall into as Muslim scholars. If you go to Western countries, but even non-Western countries, when doing Islamic studies, there is a call and expectation for academic to be neutral, to be objective, and to be critic in the approach. Often, if you speak about Islamic normativity, you're more likely to be banished from such fields because they will say you can't speak about Islam as one normative tone. There are a lot of Islams and so and so. So many departments in Islamic studies in Western countries favor approaches that either adopt a deconstructionist stance, treating Islam concepts with doubts, trying to deconstruct very fundamental Islamic ideas, or also the literature which engage through historical criticism is accepted. But it's very difficult in such environment to speak about Islam as one normative system based on a revelation. Why? Because of politics, because of ideology. And still today, curiously, we find very little or very few scholars that deconstruct his own functioning of the academic system. And it has to do also with the colonial perspective. And I think that over the next years, we will have to think or rethink about how we can study Islam in universities and how we can find our place, refusing to comply with the deconstructionist and skeptical views on Islam, but also defending the fact that the epistemology and methodology of Muslims complying with Islam is also legitimate. Myself, I would contend that the positionality of a follower of Islam, meaning that someone who believes in the fact that the last prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam received the revelation, which is the Quran, by Allah through the angel Jibril alayhi salam, what we call the wahi, the process of wahi, is as much as legitimate than the other approach that we see in universities. Because at the end of the day, all the approaches are based on premise. And at a really intellectual point of view, you can't really prove the relevance of your premise to the other people who don't believe, because at the end of the day, it's a matter of faith. But if we announce the premise that we consider the Quran to be the wahi, revelation from Allah, then we can develop an intellectual endeavor on that basis. And it has an academic and intellectual values as the other works that are doubtful about this premise. At least we have to be clear. At least we declare that our assumption as a Muslim is this faith, this basic, very fundamental premise that the Quran is a revelation from Allah and that the Sunnah is the implementation of this Quran by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We start from this idea to develop talks about Islam. That's how we have the confidence to say Islam teaches this, Islam says that, and that, and that. And of course, there is ikhtilaf on certain points, but at the same time, there is a consensus among Muslims about these fundamentals and about these core values. I think it's very important today to advocate this approach at the academic level, because a lot of unsaid patterns try to eradicate such approaches in order to lay space only to the postmodern doubtful attitude towards faith that wants to deconstruct everything. But as Muslims, we are confident in our trust, in our faith that there is a wahi, a revelation, and that the Prophet existed, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that his life is a model for speaking about Islam. That's a very fundamental point, first of it. Then, of course, although we have this premise, we have this first assumption, we need a methodology to understand the Quran and the Sunnah. And we have a very deep and long tradition in Islam of 10 centuries of scholarship. But at the same time, if we want to stick to our main fundamentals, the belief in the Quran and the belief in the Sunnah, we have to find ways to rethink about this heritage we have, based on a methodology that makes sense, that is appropriate, that is logical. For that, we propose to use the Maqasid methodology developed by Sheikh Jasir Auda, among others, that gives fundamental views about how we can approach Islam. The Maqasid methodology may challenge some of the classical fiqh issues because the context is evolving, by proposing norms which are supposed to be more in line with the spirit of the Quran and Sunnah from a teleological perspective. Teleological means that Maqasid is about higher purpose of the revelation. Teleological means the same. It means that one rule is linked to an intention and it's linked to a purpose. So we approach the Quran and the Sunnah with the idea that there is a purpose that is willed by Allah, the Almighty, and based on this idea, we go back to the revelation and to the Sunnah as an implementation of the revelation to think about what Allah wants for Muslims to follow in their life. this simple idea doesn't neglect the fact that Islam is also a discursive tradition. Like Talal Assad, the anthropologist, developed this concept in his books and articles, because although Islam has a starting point, it evolves in a society that always evolve in time, meaning that the contexts are getting different, forcing Muslims to rethink about the norms, about not the principles, but about the application of the teachings and principles of Islam. So the evolving context forces us to try to apply this methodology on new models and on new subjects. So one last word maybe about this methodology, because we don't have time to go too much in depth into this methodology that a lot of workshops the Maqasid Institute provides, explain more in detail. But we have to consider that it's a system. The Quran and Sunnah is a holistic system, a coherent system, and we can't extract just one verse, just one hadith to give rules. We have to consider the whole thing as a whole system without contradiction. That's the main idea. Of course, there are many elements that can be added for more qualification, but I don't think we have time for that today, or maybe in the discussion. But I will just give a very small reminder of this Maqasid methodology, and then we'll speak about how it applies concretely to the theme of welfare, social services, and human dignity. First of all, I would like to remember the highest importance of the niyyah, intention, because when we approach something as a scholar, we have to check our niyyah, what is our intention. When we claim to be Islamic, or when we claim to act fi sabilillah, the first idea is to check this intention, this niyyah. What are we doing what we do? Why? For what purpose? That's the fundamental principle behind every action, is this niyyah. As the hadith said, إنما العمل بالنية. First hadith we learned from the Arba'in of Imam al-Nawawi, for instance, that before every action is the intention. It will orientate everything else. But to have the good intention implies the purification of the soul, what we call tazkiyatul nafs. Because if we don't purify ourselves, it's very difficult to keep the good intention, because every nufus, every nafs, will have the same inclination to worldly matters, to greed, to pleasures, to whatever. And only with this work of trying to question our intention, to remember that we have to act fi sabilillah, for the sake of God, we can have this niyyah before any endeavor. That's very important when we speak about Muslim or Islamic projects, Islamic da'wah, Islamic charity work, because sometimes when we forget the intention, we'll see in the field that it goes astray. It goes far away from the path, because people may do things for their own interest, for money, for fame, for whatever it is. So first point is to check the intention, to have the good niyyah, to act fi sabilillah. Second point, we'll see that Maqasid methodology is a cycle process. It's not linear, and there are different ways to start. The two main points that I would like to emphasize now is that on the one hand, as Muslims, we have the divine revelation, which is the Quran and the Sunnah being the implementation of the Quran. But also we have another kind of revelation, which is the science in the universe and the science ourselves. That's what we can call the empirical reality, the study of the world. And if we look now at this scheme that reminds the Maqasid methodology circle, we can start either from the critical studies of literature and reality, meaning that if we take a specific theme, let's say infaq, let's say Islamic charities, Islamic welfare services, we can either start by studying what happens in the field, the context, understanding society as it is, not as it should be, but as it is concretely. That's a way to start. But another way to start is to think about Quran and Sunnah, circles of reflection, and finding key concepts of the Quran purpose, like infaq. Infaq or giving is something that Allah asks us in the Quran and the Sunnah. We can start with this concept and thinking what it means in Islam, meaning how is it described in the Quran and in the Sunnah, and then we develop this framework on different at different levels to have a clear vision on Islamic principles and Islamic norms applied to a specific purpose. But in my own approach, I started by another point of the cycle. I started with the study of empirical reality, meaning that I went to conduct empirical work in the Muslim NGOs in different countries. I surveyed some projects and interviewed the leaders and the stakeholders on so-called Islamic projects to understand what they do. That's my starting point. So that's just a reminder of the method, meaning that that's a cycle, and on the one hand we have the reality that has to be understood, that has to be studied, but on the other hand we have revelation, Quran and Sunnah, that have to be studied, and the challenge now is to connect both. Why? Because what we want to do is two things. First, we want to understand what Islam teaches, what Islam brings as norms, as principles, in order to understand the will of Allah for human society. That's like the map, that's like the normative system that we need and that we will use to implement that in concrete reality. That's one thing. But at the same time, we need to understand what happens in society. If we don't know our context, we cannot apply Islamic teachings. So both go hand in hand. Conversely, if we know society, we know what happens, we know the NGOs, how they work and so, but we don't know Islamic principles, then we can't claim to act fi sabilillah because we ignore the Islamic teachings. That's why this methodology has these diverse aspects, and now we'll speak about different, more concrete issues that we can see in the field. I entitled this chapter "Aligning Islamic Services with the Principles of Revelation, Bridging the Divide." Why? Because first of all, I conducted these postdoctoral and doctoral studies in different countries on so-called Islamic projects, so-called Muslim organizations, and I got a lot of data, evidence from the field. When I looked at what they do, in many cases, I found out that they claim to implement Islam, but sometimes they go against Islamic principles. Sometimes they don't understand what Islam teaches on the model. So I identified key issues, and the challenge now is to bridge the divide, because there is a gap. There is a contradiction between concrete actions that are done in the name of Islam and between proper or genuine Islamic rules and guidelines. The gap is very problematic because the gap is showing that many so-called Islamic projects worldwide don't apply Islam. So it's a kind of deception. It's not a deception that is wanted by the stakeholders or the protagonist, is a deception based on lack of knowledge, lack of awareness, and negligence and ignorance of the fundamental teachings of Islam. So now the idea is to mitigate this gap, to bridge the gap in order that Islamic projects are more in line with Islamic principles. But it can still seem a bit abstract, so I will identify now 5 common issues from the field to speak about it and to see to show the gap between what Islam brings as principles and what some Muslims do in the name of Islam without knowing what they should do. These 5 common issues, they are written here. I will take a few minutes for each of them. The first one is about the motivation behind the practice of charity and welfare. So let's go straight to the. I think I don't need to cite them. I can go. There are 5, so just let's take the first one and we'll see. The first interesting point I found on the field is that many Muslims emphasized on hasanat when they're trying to justify and to explain why they act fi sabilillah. Concretely, you have Muslim faith-based organizations in Europe in which the Muslim brothers and sisters go to a city center, they prepare food and they give the food to the homeless. If you ask them, why are you doing that? What's the purpose? What's the motivation? They will say, we're doing that because we want hasanat. If you insist, they will tell, oh yeah, I do this, I don't want to come, but I think it's good because it's like I will get a reward from Allah. Tawab or hasanat. They use the word hasanat a lot. So if you insist, you see that some of them are very stuck to this idea. They do something because they want hasanat. That's it, nothing else. An extreme example was in the literature. There was a study in Egypt about Islamic charities, and one of the leading women, a woman who led the group, said, I don't care of the poor. She said, I don't care of the poor. I'm doing what I'm doing because I want hasanat. Okay, interesting. Because if it's a free project, people do whatever they want. We can't judge. But the bottom line is that you pretend to act fi sabilillah. So now we take back this idea and we try to see if it complies with Islamic teachings. What Islam teach about the facts to give, infaq, or what Islam teaches us about the way we behave with other human beings. Although the idea of hasanat as divine retribution exists in Islam, it's true that when you do something, you can expect a reward from Allah. If you do a sin, you expect punishment, except if you do tawbah and so. But if you do good deeds, you expect to get hasanat, to get good thing, tawab, reward from Allah. That's true. But at the same time, is it possible to say, I don't care of the poor? I'm doing that just for hasanat, I don't care of other things. Does it comply with Islamic teachings? Actually, no. Just a sole and central hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying that لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. None of you will believe or will have iman or true faith until he or she loves for his brother which he loves or she loves for himself. Meaning that if you don't love for other people what you love for yourself, you won't have the faith. Iman is not completed. It's very important to listen because it shows that you cannot say, I don't care of the poor. I mean, you can say it, but it's not Islamic to say that. Because Muslims, they care of other people as they care for themselves. And the classical interpretation of the hadith here is that brother is not Muslim brother, it means brother in humanity in general, meaning that we have to love for other people what we love for ourselves. It's a key teaching in Islam, which goes in line with the idea of rahmah. Because Allah sent the Prophet Muhammad as a rahmah lil alameen. That goes in the same idea that the Muslims spread rahmah, it spread goods, and he cares of others as he cares of himself. That's not easy, obviously, but that's something we want to aspire. We want to reach that level, inshallah, bismillah. So it's not possible to claim to be acting fi sabilillah if we don't want to have the concern for the welfare of others. That's one of the teaching of Islam that we see sometimes contradicts many practices on the field. So now the idea would be to go back to the Muslim associations to try to speak to the brothers and sisters and to try to teach them, because some people ignore that. They don't know about Islamic principles. They take a isolated verse, isolated hadith, and they think, oh, I do that for hasanat, that's it, nothing else. So it's important to bring a holistic education on Islam. It's just a short example here. We can go to another thing, another aspect. In many places also, I found the problem that some of the Muslim charities protagonists ignore the real needs of the recipients. In some cases, you find that some people give foods or they provide services to recipients without having conducted any study on their conditions, needs, and demands. It's simply assumed that the needy are given what they need, often without even asking their opinion. A concrete example, in Switzerland, you have a small town named Lausanne, and there was a group of Muslims. They went to a neighborhood in which you found a lot of guys in the street. Most of them are drug addicts and they stay outside. They are homeless because of the drug addiction. And these the members of these Muslim associations, they bring food and they gave to them. But nobody wanted to accept the food because they said, oh, we have vouchers to get free food. Other city hall associations, they came to us. And it was a bit funny because on the one hand, you had these Muslim actors, they said, please take a meal we prepared for you. And the guys say, okay, thank you, I'll accept, but I'm not hungry. And then you find out that the response of a so-called social issue was not what people wanted or needed. Now you go to West Africa, in Mali, for instance, you had the same kind of project. I saw, the same kind of logic, not the same kind of project, the same kind of mindset in which you have foreign NGO going there and they launch a project, maybe it's $5 million. I saw one from the US embassy, actually. They build school, they build a lot of things, very expensive. And 10 years later or 5 years later, you go back there, it's like a ruin, nothing. Old building, nothing, nobody goes. It's like everything has been destroyed. What happened, actually, the providers of the project didn't conduct any survey, any inquiry about what people need. So, you're in an office in New York City, you think, okay, people of Mali need that. We take 5 million for the project. We'll go build that project out there and people are happy because we bring money and we bring what they need. But the problem, if we don't ask what people need, maybe we do something that is irrelevant in these areas. It's very tricky. There's our colleague, Sheikh Nuruddin Lemu, from Nigeria, that is well known here. He spoke about that in Nigeria, saying that in Ramadan, the problem, there are a lot of Muslim NGOs going there with food and they give food to the mosque for the people who are fasting at the end for iftar. The problem is that the small groceries, the small restaurants around the area will lose all their customers. So these people will face poverty because of the welfare project. Moreover, you find only a young, healthy man that goes to take the meal because the women don't have access, the children don't have access, the old people don't have access. So, with the good intention, but with lack of awareness of what happens in the field, we can do mistakes and we can develop so-called good projects that goes against the interest of the people. And the result is we found a lot of times that there is a gap and mismatch between good intentions of social actors and the needs, the real expectations and needs of the people who are supposed to benefit from the welfare services. To mitigate that, it's very important to conduct surveys, to conduct research, to understand what people need and to work with them. Myself, I don't know Bangladesh, for instance. I can't just design a project on paper and say what people in a city or in a town of Bangladesh need, because I don't know society. So since I don't know society, how come could I know what people need? I think that's also a matter of humility, in which, without wanting to help people, we have to understand people's challenges, people's situations, and people's problems. And sometimes, sadly, is not being done, which drives to a waste of the money of the Muslims, of the muhsinin, like sadaqah and zakat, is being wasted in projects that don't have any use. It's something that we very sadly see in many places. Now, I would like to speak a bit about the lack of etiquette and the ethics in charity work. I will start with an example that I've seen last year, concretely in Dakar, in Senegal. I have friends who work in a madrasa. They are local guys and they have a madrasa for kids. And one day I was in a madrasa and I saw Muslim brothers from France coming there with a packet of rice, with a lot of things to give to the madrasa. I was very surprised because these guys arrived and they didn't greet the people very quickly, Salam alaikum, and at the same time they were recording what they're doing with the smartphone, doing video and saying Assalamu alaikum, we are here fi sabilillah to help the orphans. And I turned to my friend, who is the leader of the madrasa. I said, you have orphans here among the students. So I was curious. He was surprised of my question. He said, no, all the kids here have parents. They are here to learn Quran. But in the weekend, they go back to their village. I said, okay. Then I found out that on the website of this Muslim NGO, they said that they are helping orphans. That's one of the problem, is that when they ask for money, sadaqah and zakat, they pretend that the money is going to the orphans, but actually the money is going to madrasa, which is okay, but not to orphans. And in the Quran, if we take Surah Al-Ahzab, ayat 70, it say, I don't know by heart, but taqullah wa qulu qawlan sadida. Yes? Qulu qawlan sadida. Like the Muslims, the believers are told by Allah to give a speech that is precise, that is four words, that is clear. We can't lie, even good lie, for having whatever marketing we need. And sadly, I found out that on the one hand, you go to Europe, you have a lot of Muslim NGOs. They are very concerned of developing very nice videos to make people crying. They say, MashaAllah, we are going to poor countries, we help the orphans. So give us money. Then when you go to these countries, you're seeing that what they do is very fast. They try to get off of their wealth, because that's the duty they have, is to spend the money of the sadaqah. But at the same time, sometimes they spend it in contradiction with what they advertised. So they got the money saying that they will help the orphans, but they don't help orphans in some cases. That's one problem that is against Islamic teachings. Another problem is the akhlaq, the behavior of these people, going with videos for marketing also, but forgetting respect. When you go somewhere, it's not your home, so you knock the door, you ask permission to enter, you greet the people, and that's akhlaq, basic akhlaq. And sometimes you don't see that because in the name of giving, they think that they can do whatever they want. And again, we are here to speak about Islam, and Islam has ethics in the giving, ethics in dealing with other people. And I think it's very important here to remind us all these aspects. Another idea, because I don't have much time left, is the idea of discriminating non-Muslims. A big question of Muslim providers in some countries is, who do we help? Do we help Muslims or do we help all humans in need? The cases I observed in Europe are doing quite well because they are aware that they are supposed to help everybody according to Islam. But in some countries, in some areas, you find this idea: do we discriminate non-Muslims? Do we favor Muslims in food distribution or in welfare or not? Here, it's interesting to go back to the Quran with Surah Al-Insan, whose verse 8 and 9 speak about the fact that Allah asked the believers to give food in spite of love for it to the needy, the orphan, the captive. We feed you only for the countenance of Allah. Fisabilillah. We wish not from your reward or gratitude, meaning that the providers provide fisabilillah without wanting any reward. They do that just for liwajhillah. That's a very important lesson also in terms of akhlaq. But also here in the verse, it speaks about the asir, captive man who couldn't be Muslim at the time of the revelation. So some groups, some Muslim groups, take this verse as an evidence that the fact to provide the infaq is not only for Muslims, but is for all human beings who need it, even captive. And captives at the time were enemies of Islam, enemies of the Muslims. But still, yet Allah asked the Muslims to feed them. That's just a reminder that welfare services are to be offered to every people, not just the Muslims, but also the non-Muslims. Based on what? Based on revelation, Quran and Sunnah. There is an exception for Zakatul Mal. Zakatul Mal, there is these interesting books in fiqh of Yusuf al-Qardawi, rahimullah. They said that the zakat, based on the mainstream interpretations, is for Muslims. And there is evidence of that. I said the last point, actually, it's quite a big concern in many Islamic NGOs, Muslim organizations in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, that focus on da'wah. So their main concern is da'wah. They want Islam to be spread. They want new people to become Muslim. But some of these organizations, in addition to da'wah, they also use philanthropic activities, or what they call welfare projects or social charities, and humanitarian aid, and so. And you find that in many cases, people are confused about both. Some of the leaders of these organizations say clearly that they use welfare services in order to promote a good image to Islam, or they use it as a way to reach people in order that they become Muslims. And I think that's important and widespread shortcoming and mistake people do in the name of Islam and in the work fisabilillah based on ignorance. When you talk to them, they explain you that welfare services are not important. What matters is people to be Muslims. If you explain them why, they would tell you that food doesn't help you much. But if you have Islam, you will have, inshallah, success in the hereafter. So based on the argument, they think that humanitarian aid or welfare services are secondary and the da'wah is primordial, is paramount. Based on this idea, some of them use or misuse welfare services to nourish the project of da'wah. For instance, they go to poor neighborhoods and they give food. At the same time, they may give a booklet about Islam. They may give some books and they tell them, okay, you want good food, you are welcome to come Saturday afternoon. We have an event at the mosque. And they use this the money to fight poverty in order to promote the projects or the agenda in da'wah. The problem of that is Islam teaches two things at the same time. On one hand, as I showed before, welfare is an order, is asked by Allah without condition. So someone who is hungry, we have to give him food or give her food. It's not because we want anything for the person. That's one thing. On the other hand, there are Islamic injunctions that promote da'wah, that promote the idea to share, spread the message. That's true. But one should not use the other one as a means, because both of them are not means but purpose in itself. And in many cases, we see that welfare charity projects are used just as means to promote da'wah. That's very problematic because people are also aware of that. And going to Latin America, for instance, I observed a lot of projects that just speak about da'wah, and when they give food to people, they explain it's for the purpose of spreading Islam. The problem, when we look at that, we refine the same mindset from Christian evangelical organizations in Africa, for instance. In countries like Niger, like Mali, you may find or meet these Christian evangelists with a lot of money coming from the US, coming from Brazil. They go and build a school and give food to people, and they tell them, although they are not Christians, they come, no, go to the mass. God bless you with wealth because of us. So you have to enter our religion. When we witness that, we are quite disgusted because we feel that these people buy people's faith with money. But sadly speaking, some of Muslim organizations do the same mistake. They go and they don't care of people's need. They don't care of people's welfare. They want them to become Muslim. Of course, we want people to be Muslim because we want the message of Islam to be spread. But at the same time, if we know that some people don't want to accept the Islamic message, the duty that we have to them is still rahmah, is still to spread good things and to spread wealth, to spread food, and to give them what they need. That's two different missions, and one shouldn't instrumentalize the other for the sake. I think that's one of the key things I try to address in my research based on evidence from the field. Of course, not all organizations do that, but some of them are committing this kind of mistakes sometimes. So I think my time is over, but in brief, the idea was to illustrate by these 5 points these kind of discrepancies or this kind of contradiction or gap that we find between action, fi sabilillah, or supposed to be fi sabilillah, and genuine teachings from the Quran, principles from Quran and Sunnah. Why I want to highlight this gap or these problems instead of the good things that we can witness, because I think that's a way to underline and highlight the silence of having a proper methodology to approach Islam. Islam is not a label that we have to put on restaurants, like some people speak about Muslim food, Islamic university, Islamic restaurants, Islamic finance, whatever. But the deep question behind that is, what is Islamic in those endeavors? Is it really Islamic, or is it something that we put it as a varnish just to show that we are identity-based Muslims? It's not like that. Islam provides its own worldview with principles and norms that are supposed to be implemented in the field, in concrete projects, especially when we are supposed to, when we call them Muslim NGOs, Muslim or Islamic social work, we have to make sure that it comply with these principles. And to get these principles, we are forced to have a proper epistemology and methodology that makes sense. That's why I referred to the work of Sheikh Jasser Auda, because in his two last books, he expounded on how we can use this methodology in order to extract Islamic principles. And then the second step would be to apply these principles on projects. Here, that's just a very quick mind mapping about the concept of infaq in Islam. I ask the question to whom, why, who, and we find evidence in the verses of the Quran and how to do that, to whom, why, but also we found also different concepts that are associated. If we work on that, we finish by establishing a current system that we can genuinely call Islamic, inshallah, bi'idnillah, because it's based on the wahi and it's based on the sunnah as an implementation of the Quran. And the last step will be to try to apply that in reality. That's very important. But we have first to understand what Islam brings as solutions, as principles, and then to see how it can be applied in the field, in the context. So I would like to open the discussion, questions and comments, please, here. جزاكم الله خير والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Baptiste, for this for the presentation. And it is, in my view, it is an excellent example of how a phenomenal study based on the Maqasid methodology can be conducted and presented. And this is something not only interesting, but it is an example of how an empirical study can be done, and the importance of observational studies, especially if we are talking about social studies, sociological studies, and studying some groups and the communities, and how people behave in those communities. And in trying to explain it also from the Maqasidi perspective, this is where we should start with the Niyya, as Dr. Brodard said, and develop our understanding and develop the framework from using the primary sources of Islam. Let's open for the question and answer session. So please, if you have any questions or comments, you are free to open your mic and ask your question. You can raise your hand if you want to ask, or you can just open your mic and ask, or you can write in the chat.
I think also it's important to add that this methodology can be applied to many fields, or let's say all the fields that human life is concerned about. Here, the example is about welfare, social services, or it can be applied to humanitarian aid, or even dawah, spreading Islam. But at the same time, we find the same approach and method applied to psychology, applied to counseling, applied to even architecture, maybe, whatever it is. So it's interesting to find different observations, but I think you're doing that very well with the other workshops you have. But just to make this reflection.
Maybe I could ask just one question here, just to go on with to continue the discussion. So, in your opinion, what are some of the most significant challenges you have identified in aligning this current Islamic social services with Maqasidi approach, and how this can be addressed? What are the challenges in identifying or aligning Islamic social services with the Maqasid approach? Can these organizations adopt this, or how would this process look like? In For these organizations to adopting the Maqasidi methodology or outlook or frameworks in their work.
Yeah, yes. Thank you, Dr. Ildos. I think it's a very good question. It's the problem we are facing right now after writing this kind of article or introduction of like, because the paper's purpose is not just is not entertainment, obviously, but it's like a guideline, something that we would like to use to have an effect on reality. And still now we have this struggle to see how we can influence what happens in the field. So the main challenge I see here is, first of all, there's a big gap between two kinds of let's say social settings, or two kinds of environments. On the one hand, you have the scholars, whoever they are, but people who think, people who try to make sense of things at the intellectual level. So it leads to the publication of papers or conferences or whatever. That's one public, that's one setting. On the other hand, you have people we can call them maybe activists, people on the field that do things. They don't talk too much, maybe they don't have time to read, but they're going somewhere and they do something with their hands. Either they launch an NGO or they do a project and so. And the challenge I find is the lack of communication between both. Because on the one hand, the scholarship environment is supposed to bring these ideas and to bring the new solutions we have to tackle social issues, for instance. And we're doing that. But the problem, the other guys can reproach us to stay in an abstract way, and they say, okay, you write books, you talk, but what are you doing in reality? The problem, obviously, we would answer that we are here to try to orientate them and to try to guide them and to try to influence their deeds. But they said, we know what we do. We don't need you. And that's things I found that the most challenge is to make them realize that we are not here to criticize, but we are here to try to bring added value. We're here to try to bring counseling and advice of what would be a more suitable practice for projects that are in line with Islam. But often I feel in my own experience that there is a lack of communication. First of all, we don't find common settings to gather practitioners with intellectuals. That's one thing. Second point is that even if we meet them, many of the guys are not there. They said, I did my project, I did my own organization. I don't want somebody else to tell me what to do. And there is also a lack, that's the third point, is there is a lack of understanding on the things. Many people think is common sense. They think that doing welfare projects or helping people is very easy. So they feel they are not doing something wrong. They don't think they need scholarship for that. They think that as long as they help, or they think they help, it's good. So they would say, what's the need to address these issues? Because at least we're doing something. And you need a lot of examples and evidence from the field to show them, actually, no, what you're doing is not always good. So much money has been wasting in nonsense projects. From the Gulf, for instance, you had millions of dollars being sent to Latin America for da'wah projects. When you go to these countries, you see that the money disappears in many instances. But what about the monitoring? What about the evidence? I think that in the name of good niyyah, in the name of husn al-dhan, we found out with this contradiction between. Let me take a concrete example. I don't want to be long, but here in the country I'm in now, in France, you have a lot of Muslims. They give charity. They give online, the sadaqah, maybe zakat, whatever it is. Let's say sadaqah. Some of them said, I do my part. I'm giving the money. Then I'm not responsible of what happened with the money. So they don't look for evidence. They don't ask for report and so. And then they forget because they said, okay, I gave $1,000. I don't want to know what happened because I did that, and Allah knows that I have good intention. Because of these arguments, a lot of people, they just forget what happens, and you find that money somehow is getting misused. But nobody speak about that. That's one problem. The other problem is, in my case, if I speak about that, NGO leaders, they will be upset with me. They will say, okay, you're doing nothing and you criticize the good things, the khair that we are doing. That's a risk. If I speak like that, they will tell me, what did you do concretely except writing books and reports? That's I think that's why it's a problem of communication. Everybody is working on his side, thinking that he does the good thing. Some people are doing mistakes, but to defend themselves, to justify themselves, they will tell you, at least I'm doing that with only Allah knows my niyyah. I do with good intention, so don't judge me. So it's very difficult to address these issues and to improve it. But what I recommend, for instance, to charities, to NGOs, is to have more, how to say that, to have more clarity, to have more transparency in their work. For instance, I say them, why won't you write a report at the end of the year? You can mention how much money you collected and what you did with the money. Because it's not your money, it's the money of the Ummah. It's the money fi sabilillah. So you have to explain to society, we got, I don't know, $100,000 this year, and we spent that for that, this for this for that. Then people can trust you. Because now, because of the shortcomings we witness, the bad side effect we have in society is also Muslims or non-Muslims, they doubt to give money to charities. They said, we don't know where the money is going. And this new culture of doubt is very dangerous for good deeds, because I think because of the mistakes of a few number of associations, the confidence and trust that people have in this kind of NGOs is getting down and down. And that's my main concern. To mitigate this risk, I think just that we need to emphasize the importance of having transparency with the use of money and to try to work in a better way. That's why also that's good to organize workshops, but hopefully we can connect both scholars and activists around the same table and to speak about how to improve these things. At the end of the day, it's always a matter of education, and it takes time, inshallah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, Hafiz al-Rawahi, please.
Assalamu alaikum. Thanks for this very important, presentation. Just a quick question. Is the lack of regulation could be part of the issue, because many of these charity organizations are not really regulated? Thanks.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yeah, that's the, mashallah, a bit the same argument that I concluded my last comment. The lack of regulation is, a lot of people like that because they're afraid of the state control, especially when it's about Muslims, because of the ideological and political global context. It's very tough. Even if you use money only for good things, you'll be afraid of consequences with some of the states or some of the banking systems that may block the account, and so for these reasons, some people they like things that are a bit hidden, that are a bit secret. But at the same time, then how you can trust? You can trust them if you know them directly, but at the global level, I think anyhow it must be. We have to develop ways of control. We can't escape this. And one very easy way I would like to say it's to start with having this kind of reports at the end of the year. Report how much money we collected, how much money we spent, what for, what are our targets, and so. And this is very easy to start with, I think. Then about control, it depends a lot of each national context, but yeah, I think that it has to turn that way. But the problem of too much control, sometimes it can be also counterproductive. In the cases, some of the states want to control everything. If, for instance, you send money to Gaza, then you have a problem because they will say you support Hamas or whatever, even if it's just to give food to needy people, for instance, just an example, but there are plenty of examples. So I think it's a balance, but I will just recommend the stakeholders to start with concrete reporting that are not that difficult, even without speaking about control, just transparency.
But this issue is not only a problem Muslim majority countries. This problem is serious even in Muslim majority countries. So
Yes,
I think some form of basic
no,
regulation, I think, are necessary. In order
you're
to
right.
make
You're right. Especially in Muslim countries, it's easier to implement that because we have more trust. In some of them, depends where, of course, but that's it. Yeah, I think the kind of control, one day it will come our way anyhow. And the first, before institutional control, we have to get this self-control first. And that's why I spoke so much about transparency, because you speak about control, I think it's one of the step we're going to, but before that, first having this kind of very basic transparency, we get that money, we're doing that. It looks obvious, but I promise in many cases, in Muslim or non-Muslim societies, you have people, they collect money, they disappeared with the money. You don't even know. Even online, it's like GoFundMe for this kind of project. You find that one group of people, they got $300,000 for a project of da'wah in Latin America. Then you visit the project, you want to ask, what did you do with the money? It disappeared. Like nothing has been done, but $300,000 have been used. And I think reporting is the first step, yeah? Transparency. Then control is up to a more law-based aspect that depends a lot on the countries, because it will be different from each country. But I think, yeah, you're right. It's something that has to be developed and taught.
Dr. Zaid?
Yes, I have two questions here, my dear Dr. Baptiste. One is in writing this paper and developing your ideas, how was the Quran reflection? What was your experience with the Quran reflection and really deriving these thoughts and ideas, just like from your journey with the Quran Kareem? That is one thing. The second question I have is, so you raise a very important point that about this gap between those who are either on the scholarly side or academic side and those who are on the ground doing the work. And there is a gap between the two. So one of the things that we try to advocate for and the Maqasid Institute, and I cannot say we have like succeeded in building a model for, is that, but there has to be some kind of a continuum, kind of a circle where we people in academia learn from what's happening in the field, and people in the field have trust in people in the scholarly side, and then we just benefit from each other. So in getting to that point, do you think you can? Do you have an idea of a model of how this relationship can be institutionalized, so that this relationship between the scholars and the activists can be more productive, can be built on trust, and ultimately you all can serve the ultimate purpose behind what we are all doing in this field. For example, this case, social service, in a much better way. Can you imagine of a model that where this can actually work in a productive and efficient manner? والله أعلم. جزاك الله خير. تفضل.
وإياكم بارك الله فيك دكتور زيد شكرا لسؤالك. First of all, for the Quran, I would say that it's a not ending process, because Alhamdulillah, the Professor Sheikh Jasser provided us with the Maqasid methodology, that we have the books, especially his two last books, which explain how to think about Quran and Sunnah as a holistic system in which we can find the regulations, the norms, the principles, the direction to find our way applied to diverse themes and subjects. That's one thing. These books help for the methodology. Then the Quranic reading, I'm speaking it as a non-ending process, because every time we complete the reading of the Quran, I think we are getting with an increase of information that we didn't find first of all, but it takes time. As the big scholars of the past even mentioned in their whole life that they failed to understand some wisdom of some of the ayat of the Quran till maybe 20, 30, 40 years later, after reading the Quran many times. They found out through the process of ilham, inspiration also sometimes. But it's a process in which myself, I try to read, and I try to get ideas and to build this kind of mind mapping, to connect ideas together, to build my system as a puzzle, if you allow me the expression, knowing that this process is not ending. But I'd better start with part of the puzzle that nothing at all. So it's like a building in progress. That's how I see it. So the Quran reading and allows me to get some ideas of principle, concept, and aspect, and regulations and wisdom that I can apply to this theme of welfare, for instance. But again, it's an ongoing process, and we have hope that collectively, or even at the individual scale, we try to enrich understanding of the Quran. But alhamdulillah, thanks to Sheikh Jasser methodology, we have this better insight of how to approach this text and to start with something. I think that the starting point is very important, because human life is a process, and we always start from something and we try to develop and increase our knowledge. Then for the second point, it's well, we had more or less with Dr. Ilda's similar question, but it's very important point, because strategically, I think that the good thing with the Maqasid Institute, it has a name, it has a scholarship legitimacy already, and it's easier for an institute like the Maqasid to reach Islamic organizations and to propose them to give maybe a talk, to give a conference, or to give some guidelines that we advise them to follow. Of course, we can't force them to follow, but we can try to influence them. And I think one of the way to deal with this would be to propose kind of a label but I don't know how to advertise that. But it can be a label that we give somehow some guidelines and then some monitoring to testify that such and such project are in line with Islamic principles. And so I think it's difficult because if we present it like that, it doesn't sound an idea that people like, because they would say, who are you to give us a label? That's the problem of communication, maybe. But in depth, I think that's an important step, because we need collective work. We need also to bring scholarship to concrete practice. And I think it's quite wise to have kind of an external body like the Maqasid Institute that can both providing guidelines, Islamic scholarship, but at the same time to check if the project is in line with genuine Islamic interpretations. If not, counseling them to do it better. You know, that's how I see the things. That's the accompaniment or the companionship that we can provide, like helping to guide them. But it's a matter of communication at the end of the day, because here I talk like that, but of course, if I speak like this, they could say, who are you to pretend to guide us? We are Muslims like you. And so, but if you get the idea, I think we need this kind of providing inspiration, providing guidelines, providing counseling or advice how to improve the projects in order to make them complying with Islamic teachings. Then if it doesn't work, because maybe we don't find partners for that, then I think the last solution would be to implement something ourselves. Even at a small scale, it can be a pilot project. If we do a pilot project which reach 30 people, but which is very interesting, which work, it will be presented as success story, for instance, that can be replicated in many places. And I think on the one hand, we try to propose our service, but if nobody wants our service, on the second hand, we have to make it ourselves. Because it's like me. I'm thinking, even in my own life, I'm thinking the same. I'm trying to develop ideas, reflection on the model. So with these ideas, I'm trying to influence people from the field. But at the end of the day, the life is short. So if nobody wants to follow what I think I can provide, the logical second step for me is to prove it. If I really trust it's good, I have to do it myself. Even if it's like with $1,000 with 10 people, at least I do something better than nothing. That's my vision of the work. You know, these two levels. Either we try to influence organizations, as I said, but if not, maybe pilot project is very interesting to show that we extract some principles from the Islamic reflection on Islamic scriptures, and we want to show society that it can be beneficial to both Muslims and non-Muslims. So we provide a project that is based on what Allah asks Muslims to do. I think that's a way to deal with that, inshallah.
Well, one of the things I think was not also addressed here is that any officially registered organization in any jurisdiction, they're supposed to fulfill some legal requirements. And I guess how to really address this issue that you talked about, and also align it with the legal requirements, because company organizations, charity organizations, they're also under the spotlight of the authorities, and especially in those countries that you just visited recently, in Central Asia, and whether it is Russia or Central Asia, and I think also in any part of the world, authorities do have the means and the abilities to track the funds, to track those charities, and this is where there is a legal issue and the requirements. But also there is another issue, I would say, is the standards. Are there any standards for charity work today? And I'm sure there are some standards, international kind of level, or maybe some sort of standards that will help these organizations to follow, and that legally they're also recognized. And and if there are any organizations, whether they are Muslim, non-Muslim based, if they do not comply, then they are doing illegal work, and maybe also it's against some Islamic kind of against Sharia or something. How do we align these things?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ildos. I think the standards, there are two things here. On one hand, you have the law, which depends on each country. On the second hand, you have the standards. That's a bit different because the law is quite clear, but it's very diverse from a country to another country. So, for instance, if you are in Sweden and you launch a charity association, you just have to register, and as long as you don't go against the law, they will let you doing what you want, more or less. But they have regulations, you just have to follow that, which gives a lot of space. It doesn't mean that it's ethical, it means that it's lawful. But in some countries, like maybe Central Asian countries, that's a bit more tricky because the law is stricter and you have to show evidence that you're not against the interest of the state and blah blah blah, and that require more care and more to be more careful to avoid complications and consequences. So it depends a lot of the country, but one aspect is the law. And here, every national context has to be taken differently to understand what is lawful or not. And that's the first thing, to obey the law, because that's the first requirement. We cannot escape this. The second thing is the standards in terms of ethics. That, for instance, it allows also people to trust their organization, but also partnerships. So, for instance, in a lot of countries, maybe let's take Senegal in West Africa, NGO would like to establish contact with the United Nations to show that they are partners, and doing that, they will show that they have this kind of legitimacy. It's not about the law; it's about being recognized as somebody serious and ethical. And this standards is based mostly in the profession of social work on how you deal with the minorities and how you deal with the idea of neutrality, impartiality. Meaning that if you say you help only Muslims and not non-Muslims, in some countries, it will be still lawful, but it will be against ethical standards of humanitarian work. So you can still have your NGO doing that, but it wouldn't be recognized as a partner by United Nations also. But if you are clear about your principles in terms of ethics, then you can show that on the one hand, it comply with Islam, but on the second hand, complying with Islam also means that it comply with the ethical norms of humanitarian worldwide, and by doing this clear by communication, it shows that it complies with the standards that are accepted by a wide scope of partners, which is very helpful to have impact also. But that's the two different levels. One is the law, the other one is the standards in terms of ethics. The law is depending on each country. So it has to be verified before acting somewhere, of course, that it complies with the regulation. The standard is about which ethical principles we make it clear, we advertise. Yes?
All right. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions or comments? Bashir, I know that you raised your hand and then you lowered it. Would you like to ask anything or comment?
Thank you very much for the invitation. I actually saw it a bit late. That's why I was later joining. But I was able to catch the ending of the presentation, and our presenter made some points which I have some few questions and comments. So from where I sit, where I come from, so my experience with some of these NGOs is that, first of all, some of those who run these NGOs are scholars who, even though have knowledge of the deen, but when it comes to being able to fit in relative to employment within the societies that they find themselves, that becomes difficult. And so because you are dealing with Muslim minorities, how does the scholar fit in someone who has spent years reading religious sciences? How does such a person fit in relative to employment? And so it is through these NGOs that they make a living. And so they run these NGOs, and by running these NGOs, they're able to make a living out of it. Now the challenge is, you find an NGO operating in a society whereby funds come for a particular project, but that particular project is not needed in the society. So for instance, when it is Eid al-Adha, so funds do come in for some of these NGOs to go around some villages, offer sacrifices, the udhiyah, on behalf of those who have sent in the funds. But when you look at some of these societies, they lack educational infrastructure, they lack health infrastructure, they lack certain basic amenities that we feel that should be prioritized relative to the Sharia. Rather than just offering udhiyah for these people, there are other projects that these societies need. But then you find these NGOs not prioritizing some of these projects, largely because the argument is some of those who supply the funds for specific projects. And so it's not about the needs of the community wherein you operate, but the intention of the one giving, supplying the funds. And so here comes my question. How will you advise that some of these NGOs deal with situations like this? Because some of us have always argued that whenever we had interactions with these NGOs, we've always argued that the priorities of the societies that they operate in should be prioritized. And so if you go to a society and they have educational needs, focus on the educational needs. But the argument from the NGOs is, when you are giving a fund to do a particular project and you don't do it, the fund will stop coming. The one giving the fund will not give you the fund again, because the person feels that he has given you a fund or an amount of money to do a particular project. You have not done it. The person is not interested in the need of the specific context that you are operating. And so what advice will you give? What will be your comment on issues such as this? Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Dr. Brother Bashir and Muhammad. Thanks a lot for the comment. I will say not just the question, because the question is at the end of the comment, but you gave a very interesting testimony or explanation of what happens, and I tried in this talk of today to highlight these issues that are twofold. If I listen to your comment, on one hand, you have people who are not skillful to know what to do for society. They are the leaders of NGOs, they are the leaders of organizations, they got money, they may be imams, they may be scholars, but they don't know how to tackle social issues they're supposed to tackle. Let's say we can take a project about drug addiction, I don't know. You can put a Muslim scholar, but if he's not a scholar of drug addictions, it wouldn't be efficient in this function. Yet a lot of such people, they occupy positions in which they have power, but they don't know how to handle the real issues that they're supposed to tackle. that's a very, very big problems that we have, in which we try to mitigate that by encouraging a mutual cooperation between the scholars of different fields. But the Maqasid approach is all about that, because the Maqasid approach is to study the scriptures in line with also the theme in which we are supposed to apply Islamic teachings. So we want to have scholars of artificial intelligence, of economy and finance, or social issues, and so. But at the same time, they have to be skilled in Islamic interpretation and fiqh, and so both at the same time, because it's sad to see that many leaders of NGOs, of social welfare associations, they don't know how to handle that. It's a work by itself, but they think that everybody can do that. So that's a first problem you highlight. The other problem you highlight, I think, is even more important, is a matter of intention. It works as a business for some people to be leaders of an organization, because they get money from outside. They can get the sadaqat, zakat, and finally they live on that. And sometimes they propose projects that the society doesn't need. But that's why the very, very big importance is on intention. Why do we do? If we do it just for personal reward, personal interest, it's wrong, because it's like spoiling and robbing money of the ummah for our own interest. But many people are doing that, whether they are aware or not. They conduct their project as a personal business, and they don't like to think too far away, as long as money come. But as you said, you find these corrections because they want to give outputs, they want to give deliverables to show that they do that, but maybe the society doesn't benefit from that at all. So yeah, then I'm very happy about your comment, because I think that's the bottom line, and the basic of the problem, that the two things you mentioned. But now about your question, subhanallah, I will ask you the same question. I think we all have to reflect on the ways to mitigate that. On the one hand, when we see someone who acts wrongly in Islam, we are supposed to advise him. But if the first thing that we have to do is to advise normally. But it's difficult to advise, because when you advise a guy who maybe who take advantage of his projects, doing his own business, he wouldn't like to listen to the advice. But that's a duty to say what you're doing is not wrong. Personally, it's very difficult to do it. Maybe as an organization, we have more power to give advice, to say we are aware of what you do, fi sabilillah, but we, as a Muslim brother, we advise you to stop that. It's not appropriate. You should rather consider this and this option.
Okay, so thank you very much, everyone, for taking part in the session today. Anyway, so let us end the session today, and it was really I think, fruitful session for everyone who joined, and a very interesting topic by itself. And I would like to invite everyone to locate the paper. Just visit our website, maqasid.org, and go to the journal. Click on the right-hand side. There is a small button there, journal. Go to the journal, and just scroll a little bit down. It's in the latest issue of our Journal of Contemporary Maqasid Studies, JCMS. Download this paper and please read it. And you can contact Dr. Baptiste directly, inshallah, either through the journal, or you can also contact through me. And so we will end the session today with dua kafarat al-majlis. So سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. And so again, thanks everyone for joining, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.